This is a blog post from a blogger called the Bridgehead.ca.Canada. Canada's new euthanasia law threatens your loved ones who suffer from mental illness. Now, this was back in March 2021. If we have a look at the content of the blog, Mike, so from the blog itself, experts have been predicting a pandemic of mental illness stemming from the COVID-19 pandemic and the government response to it. So, surprise, surprise, there are mental issues as a result of the extreme measures taken by the UK government, for example, and of course the Canadian government, which was one of the most draconian. Now, again, as part of the blog, never before has Canada offered suicide rather than prevention. This is very important here. Canada is this entire, what I would describe as a sort of transhumanism, which is rebranded eugenicism program, is being put through by the majority of the Five Eyes countries, but Canada is leading the way. Bill C7 was introduced last February, so that was at the same time as COVID-19 broke out, so February 2020, after the Quebec Superior Court's Truchon decision struck down the 2015 law's requirement that someone's death be reasonably foreseeable before they became eligible for assisted suicide. Unsurprisingly, the Trudeau Liberals didn't bother to appeal the decision and instead passed Bill C7 in December 2020. The Senate amended the legislation to allow those with mental illness, and we also have to ask who asserts that somebody is eligible for the mental illness fast track towards medically assisted assistance in dying, which is MAiD, that's the Canadian program, and has no other disease or condition eligibility for assisted suicide. In other words, you can be eligible for assisted suicide simply if you are suicidal. So rather than offering prevention, they are offered suicide. Back to that point. Bill C7 removed the requirement in the law that a person's natural death be reasonably foreseeable in order to qualify for assisted death. Therefore, people who are not terminally ill could die by euthanasia. The Truchon decision only required this amendment to the law, but Bill C7 goes further. I'd recommend going to this particular blog to get further information, but it also includes the fact that the 10-day waiting period for those with foreseeably fatal illnesses has been waived, and the fact that doctors and nurses can lethally inject a person incapable of consenting. Just let that sink in a minute. So medically assisted suicides in Canada, you can see there a clear increase leading up to 2021. So if you look at from 2020, which is when the whole COVID project kicked off, to 2021, there's a clear and quite dramatic increase. But even from 2016, obviously, when the bill was introduced. Moving on, Mike. So I recommend reading this article. There's a lot of interesting information in it, considering it's a mainstream article. Federal Minister Carla Qualtrough, Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Disability Inclusion, said that she's shocked by the suggestion of assisted deaths for some babies. Let's have a look at what she means by that. So basically, I find that completely shocking and unacceptable that infants less than a year old should have access to medically assisted deaths if they are unlikely to survive and are dealing with severe health issues. The idea was raised earlier this month at a parliamentary committee hearing reviewing the federal law that governs medical assistance in dying. Dr. Louis Roy of Quebec's College of Physicians said his group believes assisted death could be offered to babies up to 1 year old with severe deformities and very serious syndromes for which the chances of survival are virtually nil and which will cause so much pain that a decision must be made not to allow the child to suffer. Now, Mike, one issue that I wanted to raise here, how much of the diseases that are going to be upcoming in the future, or even defects using their kind of terminology, are related to vaccines, either to the mother or to young children. That has to be a question which they are not raising, but which we need to raise, bearing in mind the correlation between this act and the COVID project, right?
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Go on ahead.
Going on. This is shocking for me. Qualtrough said it should not be easier to access a medically assisted death than to get a wheelchair, but it is. Again, I recommend reading this article. It is really seriously disturbing, and what the hell is going on in Canada? Okay, moving on. We're coming on here, Mike. You mentioned I think it was Extra last week. This was an opinion piece from Maria Zaharova,
And we've just lost Vanessa.
she's
So
as I will remind you that the Third Reich, with its Action T4 program, was the first. Oh,
it's okay. Keep going because we'll bring
I
Zakharov on
can't because
here.
I haven't got the
Yeah.
slide anymore.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll read it out while we
Yeah,
go here. So
okay.
Zakharova said this. If we could put that on screen, please, Stephanie. Canada legalized physician-assisted suicides in 2016. The number of people who wish to be euthanized has been growing annually. In all probability, Canada will reach 50,000 such deaths a year. I'll remind you that the Third Reich, with its Action T4 program, was the first state to introduce euthanasia on a mass scale. Apart from racial prejudice, the Nazis proceeded from economic considerations. It was expensive to pay for people requiring treatment. This was a tax burden, according to a document found in the Horrifying Euthanasia Center in Nazi Germany. 70,273 people were killed under the Tiergarten Strasse 4 program by September the 1st, 1941. An unknown Nazi clerk noted with chilling pragmatism, considering that these patients could live for another 10 years, this is a saving of 885,439,800 Reichsmark in total. And then she ended by saying, is the motivation of neoliberal Ottawa different from that of the Reich? Judge for yourselves. Yeah, I'm afraid we've lost Vanessa. So what we'll do is while we see if she can reconnect, I'll just run on through this here. She wanted to highlight this tweet from Ian Miles Chung. Canadian clothes retailer 7's is actually using suicide to market their products. No, this isn't made up. It's part of a sweeping effort to introduce medically assisted suicide as a treatment for mental illness, PTSD, and even children with defects in Canada. So let's just have a quick look at a little piece of promo video that this clothes manufacturer 7's pushed out.
Last breaths are sacred. When I imagine my final days, I see bubbles. I see the ocean. I see music. Even now, as I seek help to end my life, there is still so much beauty. You just have to be brave enough to see it.
So all is beauty, apparently. So a Canadian retailer exploits a young artist's euthanasia to market its fashions. And if we just look at the content of this, it's saying sometime after Canada's Thanksgiving Day, on the 10th of October, a 37-year-old woman named Jennifer was euthanized. A few days later, on 24th of October, one of Canada's best-known fashion retailers, Quebec-based La Maison Simon, launched an advertising campaign based on her wish to die. Euthanasia was as performance art is the prerogative of the well-to-do, the well-connected and the privileged. Euthanasia as social injustice will be the lot of the down and outs, the abandoned and the marginalised, says this article. If Simon's really valued community connection and compassion, it would be subsidising housing and medical care for people like this. Instead, it's exploiting the death of a young artist to burnish its brand as a champion of progressive values. So let's see what comes next. all is beauty. So this is more from the American Conservative covering this. And the quote here is Peter Simons, the CEO, who said the short film discloses the heart of the company's values and was made to help build human connection and encourage people to be moral and to help build the communities we want to live in tomorrow and leave to our children. Everything we admire on this earth today, science and art, technology and inventions, is only the creative product of a few people's. This is now a quote from Adolf Hitler that Vanessa was wanting to compare with the Simons quote. Is only the creative product of a few people's and originally perhaps one race. On them demands existence of this whole culture. If they perish, the beauty of this earth will sink into the grave with them. Then let's see what else we've got here. Then we've got the New York Times. New York City to involuntarily remove mentally ill people from the streets. Mayor Eric Adams directed the police and emergency medical workers to hospitalize people they deemed too mentally ill to care for themselves, even if they posed no threat to each other. So the links between euthanasia and eugenics, Patrick, are there. And what's going on in Canada is taking it really to an extreme.
Yeah, the numbers are staggering. These are industrial scale numbers. I think the last year or so is like 18,000. It'll be projected to be 30,000 such people on this sort of official death pathway in Canada. I think it says a lot about Canadian society. I think it says a lot about the politics in Canada. And if you look at the COVID response, if you look at Justin Trudeau's policies, he's a highly unpopular political leader, has managed to crowbar himself into power once again in the last election. But his policies are generally not popular. But you have this kind of supine attitude that a lot of Canadians have in their way, sort of a stiff upper lip, hoping that it's just all going to go away and go back to normal. But the main feature, Mike, here is this idea of nihilism. And you see it embedded in the text. They're trying to mainstream this idea of the kind of certain destruction of death. This is what the climate change narrative feeds into. It's nihilism. If you look at the history of the Weimar Republic and what society was like, what was the milieu of culture that preceded the Third Reich, or the conditions that created the rise of the Third Reich, and then the economic depression after World War I, and you have this kind of opulence, you have this progressivism, and one of the outgrowths of that is this attitude of nihilism. And I will argue that that's really what the climate change campaigning is all about. It's about raising the current generation, the Greta Thunberg generation of children, to really believe that their future has been robbed by the adults and the baby boomers who've destroyed the planet and their future. And therefore, hey, what's the point of having children? This kind of, and what's the point of being alive, for that matter? But this all started really in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. These ideas have been groomed and brought along and are now percolating to the point where you have like literally a Logan's Run type narrative that they're pushing there, and doing it with all this kind of corporate sheen to it. It's kind of really kind of vulgar in a certain way, but they'll say that, no, this is really high progressive thinking. And so big danger here, I think, for society, if this sort of thing becomes seductive or becomes alluring to the intelligentsia and they start pushing this. But there will be pushback to this. There will be a visceral reaction as well. So get ready for that.
Okay, well, Vanessa just wanted to finish this segment off with a little clip from Redacted, who were talking, because, as I said, the connection between euthanasia and eugenics perhaps isn't clear to some people, but let's just have a quick listen to this.
Now, under the MAiD laws in Canada, this is unbelievable part of the story. Canada's Pediatric Society says it's okay to basically eliminate children, as long as they show signs that they are mature.
What does that even mean?
Let me repeat that. Canada's Pediatric Society, under these MAiD laws, basically says, hey, if the child is mature enough, like they're not an adult yet, not 18, but if they're showing signs of maturity, then they can we're going to refer to them as mature minors, and they can make the determination to kill to be assisted suicide and taken care of.
Basically, if they can decide their own gender, they can.
No, but this is the same. Yeah, you make a good point. This is the same thing, is that children should be able to change their bodies, make these decisions, make adult decisions as minors.
Oh, you're 12 and you're depressed? Well, here you go. We don't even need to check with the parents. You're a mature minor. You're 12. You seem like you're mature. Do you want a doctor's note to go and take care of that thing called life? Like, that's what we're talking about here.
We have the red and blue pill. We have the hormone blocker or the life taker. Which one do you want, red or blue?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because continuing to live how you are right now is not an option.
Unbelievable. Mature minors.
Vanessa, it looks like you're back. Welcome back. We've gone through the material. So just if you've got any closing thoughts on that.
No, I mean, I presume you showed the fact that obviously Chrystia Freeland, who's been instrumental in getting this bill through, has connections back to her great-grandfather, Michel Chomiak, who effectively ran the Krakow news in Ukraine, which promoted Nazi programs and Nazi propaganda, including the T4 euthanasia program. And it's also worth noting that he had a close connection to PR for Goebbels himself. And Goebbels in 1941 commissioned a film called Ich klage an, I Accuse, which was the story of a woman with MS who pleads with her doctor husband to end her life. It was seen by 18 million people. And of course, remembering that at the end of the war, it's an estimated 300,000 that were exterminated as part of the euthanasia program, but also not forgetting the forced sterilization program that was running alongside that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Now, if